All right, good morning. I'm so excited to be able to start the day off today talking with you about really what is one of my favorite topics, something that's really near and dear to my heart. I've spent about the last 15 years working in education of all different types. I've worked with schools, with universities, with governments, with children, with adults in this country, in that country. But more than I think of myself as an educator, I really think of myself as a storyteller. And there's a really important idea in storytelling. It's a really core belief that I carry with me in my life, and it is that the stories we tell ourselves define our reality. So I'm going to begin today just by telling you a story, and it's a story about James. When I met James, he was an 11-year-old student at an elementary school in a small city in Wisconsin. He attended a school that was an early adopter of a curriculum that I had co-created with my last company. And the curriculum was based in a story itself. It was a story of the first humans to leave Earth. They were going to leave this planet, settle a new one, and create an entirely new city there called City X. Now, the citizens of City X, when they arrived on this planet, they discovered that they were encountering a lot of problems that were pretty similar to the different types of problems that we had on Earth. And they had sent a dispatch back to Earth asking the children of our world to please become the designers for their city, the designers for their new home and for their future. And the challenge was to imagine how they could create solutions to the problems faced in City X without restrictions, without the physics of Earth, without the governments of Earth, without the civilizations and the societies and the rules and the regulations that we have, and really to think broadly and imagine how this scrappy band of settlers could create a world that worked for themselves with just new ideas and a really advanced 3D printer. So when we got to the classroom, James's teacher, she gave us a bit of a warning. She pulled us aside and she said, just so you know, James might not do so well. You know, James sometimes doesn't fit into the way that we teach here. Sometimes he doesn't really, maybe behave in the way that we want to. What she was really saying was James was a bit of a divergent thinker who didn't exactly fit into the way that his school chose to structure an educational experience. So as we went through this workshop, we kind of kept an eye on James, and we were really surprised, pleasantly surprised, when on the last day of the experience with them, James stood up to share the invention that he had designed. He had conceptualized it, he had modeled it, you can see him holding it right here, and then he had completed 3D modeling with professional grade CAD software, and then actually produced this idea he had on a 3D printer. And he stood up in front of the class and shared what was literally one of the most complex, most impressive, most thoughtful, and considered solutions to a problem in this fictional world of City X that we had seen from almost any student in any one of our workshops. And what was incredible was that he did that in about half the time of the other students in his class. And I share this story because I think it really brings home the point that these stories we tell ourselves define our reality, where James's reality at the moment was being defined by the stories that were being told around him. The stories about expectations of how we learn, the stories about expectations of how we perform in the classroom, the expectations and the stories his teachers told about him, and what he then, therefore, thought of himself. And he really defied those. And not only did he defy those, but he showed us that there's real power in collaborative learning, because that became a learning moment not just for James, who discovered a new type of intelligence that he could tap into, but it was a learning moment for his teacher, when his teacher actually began to understand that there was a student in her class who was deeply talented, whose talents and abilities might not have actually been tapped into by the way that learning was conducted. So, the most important part of any story is the narrative arc. right? It's part of our human instinct. It's literally hardwired into our brains to have a sense of where things are going. The narrative arcs in most stories are pretty predictable, right? They tend to fit patterns. And we actually get an immense amount of pleasure and relief when a narrative arc follows the path that we expect it to and comes to a great conclusion. And when those narrative arcs are broken, when those narrative arcs don't follow the path that we expect them to, we essentially feel like we're just staring at a blank page. And as we think about how we are going to learn through this future, I think this is actually one of our greatest challenges. It's the fact that we've actually lost our narrative arcs. We're at this point in time where our expectations of the world and reality are diverging, where the future is no longer quite what it once seemed, where those narrative arcs that we've relied upon for centuries, those stories that are going to tell us how to be and how to show up in the world and how to succeed, are not serving us in the way that they once did. So what we really need to do right now is to provide ourselves with new stories. We need to provide ourselves with new narratives that help us as individuals tap into our innate ability to create, to fill this blank space, to help us tap into our innate ability to be inventive and to be resilient to make it through this future that we're moving into. And this story, to me, is a story of revolutions. It's revolutions of enablement. So for most of recorded history, humans have really defined themselves very much by what they do, right? We categorize ourselves this way. We think of ourselves as a blacksmith, a captain, a teacher, a doctor, whatever it is, through this lens of profession and what we do. And although the prevailing opinion today kind of seems to be that jobs are being eliminated, I actually think something a lot more magical than that is happening. So if we look back at history and we think about some of these revolutions that have truly transformed humanity and transformed our world, the first one that comes to mind for many of us is going to be the Industrial Revolution. And in the Industrial Revolution, it was production that was valued. It was a revolution that enabled production. So therefore, if you controlled production, if you enabled production, you were the masters of the universe. And during this revolution, there was the steel companies, the oil companies, those who actually controlled those factors of production that were the reigning kings. But then, fast forward several years, and we had another revolution. That's the technological revolution. And this is one that's already about 30 years old, frankly. And in the technological revolution, things changed a little bit. The technological revolution enabled process. It enabled methods of analysis, communication, automation, dissemination. And those who controlled process were those who controlled the world. So in the technological revolution, of course, we think about the Googles and the Facebooks and the IBMs of the world who really perfected process. But this revolution is already old. This revolution is already done. Yet this revolution is often the one that we are still trying to teach to, despite the fact that it started in the last century. So today, I think we're in a totally different revolution, and it's the exponential revolution. The exponential revolution enables purpose, because the means and the standards of production around our world are largely being standardized. The process in our world has become more democratized. And today, because of this, we have this ability to actually free our minds and apply them to the things that truly make us human. We can apply our minds to things like solving the world's greatest challenges or finding our real role in the world. And the thing about this revolution, this exponential revolution, is that information is kind of the currency of the realm in this revolution, but this is not the world that we live in anymore. This world where information was controlled in certain places and you sat down and you got it from an individual or you read it in an encyclopedia. We no longer find our information from these simple, clear sources of authority because information in today's world is actually completely ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's around us. Every single person here in your pocket holds essentially the font of human knowledge on a little screen. We have companies that are making all of this information open to the world, whether we think about Wikipedia literally holding the font of all we know, or we look at something like MIT opening some of the world's greatest courses for free to anybody. But we kind of already know this to some extent. We know that we have all of this information in the world. But we're also starting to integrate with it directly. This is a photo of a project that was actually just announced at MIT this year, and it's called Alter Ego. And it's a device that actually allows us to begin to tap directly into this world of ubiquitous information with our minds. You don't need a medium of a screen. You don't need to type. In fact, you put this on and you simply think. You internally vocalize a question. It will find the answer on the internet and then tell it back to you. So, what does that mean for this revolution where information is truly what we need to have? The stories that we've told ourselves for years often conceptualize learning as just simply filling this empty vessel, right? We put it into a box, we put the right information into it. The brain disappeared, so sorry. Put the right information into it, and then good things will happen. Maybe we'll find a reliable career. We'll carry on through that narrative arc that we've always expected. We'll do the two things that are always guaranteed in life. We pay taxes and then we die. But that is not how it works anymore because we are living in a completely different world. The world we are living in today is always connected. It is a world where everything is measurable, and it is a world where information is completely unlimited. So what actually are the skills that we need to be teaching? What actually are the things that are unique to us in this exponential revolution and are going to help us navigate it and going to help us chart our own narrative arc through it? I think of this in a framework of 3 different stages, something that every single one of us can do, and we should encourage those around us to do. And the first is framing. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, over the course of history, in all of these different revolutions, we've often defined ourselves in terms of our profession. But what if we start to think of ourselves in a slightly different way, and instead we ask the question, what do you want to enable in the world? So let's use the example of a doctor, of a physician. On one hand, you could say, I am a doctor. Now, as soon as you say that, as soon as you say, I am a doctor, every single person in this room, you just had a mental image pop into your head of a doctor. What that doctor looks like, the things that doctor does on a day-to-day basis, how you interact and feel about that doctor, probably how much money they're going to make, what their career prospects look like, all of those things, all of those archetypes and stereotypes pop into our heads instantly. But what if instead, I didn't say I want to be a doctor, I said I want to enable healing in the world? It's frankly the same goal, but that simple change of words can make a really big difference. So I want to enable healing. The second stage of the framework is to forecast. And once we've framed things in terms of this enablement and what we actually want to do for the world, we can ask ourselves another powerful question, which is how will technology change what it means to do that? So it's an interesting fact that actually being a physician, physicians are one of the top careers that are most likely to be disrupted within the next 5 years. That doesn't mean eliminated, it's disrupted. They're going to change. The way we need to prepare our physicians and the things we'll expect from our physicians will be very different. Because we can ask this question, how will technology change what it means to heal? How will technology give me new tools to heal others? How will technology eliminate things that we heal today? How will technology create new ailments, conditions that need to be healed? And you, as an individual, an enabler, an aspiring enabler, you can begin to think about how you might need to chart your course and what you might need to learn and what you might need to consider as you navigate through that pathway. The third step of this framework is to forage. So we have this world of ubiquitous information, and what we need to do is we need to find our way through it. We need to navigate through this crazy world where everything we could possibly ever learn is floating out there around us and just a click away. And in this piece, I think there are two different elements, and I just imagine this just as human ancestors would forage for food thousands of years ago. There are two simple rules here. The first one is get your nutrients, and the second one is don't die. So how do we do that? How do we get all of the things we need? How do we change learning from something we do all at once to something we do constantly, to snacking, and just taking in what we need as we need it? And how do we learn to discern fact from fiction, for example? How do we verify the truth of the information that we're getting, or the accuracy of the information we're getting, so that when we apply it, we can be confident that it's actually correct? And I think there are a couple different trends in the evolution of learning that assist us with this specific process, that assist us with this foraging once we've defined the future we're moving toward. The first trend is a shift from solo learning to social learning. And in this trend, it's really just about our communities beginning to serve as a human interface for the world. I think that for so long we've imagined learning as the thing that we do as an individual. We go pursue information, we gain some sort of credential out of it, and then obviously we're just prepared to go out and use it. But the shift that we're seeing in learning is one where actually we begin to rely more on the education of those around us to be able to provide the support and the ecosystem to help us move through our own learning journey. And I see this education being something that goes far beyond our classrooms or our workplaces, but it actually goes beyond those borders into our living rooms, into our kitchens, into our playgrounds, into our communities, where we are all working together to explore these possible futures. When I think about this specifically in terms of education, when I think about this in terms of schools and the way that we're actually bringing up the next generation, I often say that kids are not the problem. It's not that we need to put something new into their brains. It's actually that we need to change the mindsets. We need to change the ecosystem around them, the parents. We need to change the teachers. We need to help them understand the realities that this new generation was born into so that they can actually provide the support they need. One of my favorite examples of somebody that I believe is just truly doing this right is a friend of mine in Shanghai who opened a new school a few years ago. It's sort of a really unique model of education where they teach everything from arts to shop to math to technology in the 7-acre campus just outside the city. And she told me they're trying something really new. And on the first day of classes, for every single student, their parents are actually required to come and take a day of classes as well. And the courses their parents go through help expose them to ideas about how success is changing in the future, expose them to ideas about how technology is actually transforming industries so that these parents don't go home to tell their kids to be an accountant or an engineer, but they're actually aware of this wide, wide breadth of different options and careers that might be in front of their students. Actually, my favorite element of her school is that she requires every one of those parents to also take a yoga class on day one. And I asked her why, and she said, have you ever met these parents? They need to chill out. So it begins to build this beautiful ecosystem of support where the educators and the parents and the students are all beginning to receive the same information and can start working together toward a singular goal. The second trend that I really see shifting is this transition from organized education, sort of this one-size-fits-all, education happens in one place at one time in one way, and if you don't fit into that, well, too bad, to a new type of learning that is highly optimized. So when we talk about solo to social, we're looking at everything around us. And when we imagine this transition from organized to optimized, I believe we're starting to look within ourselves. This slide has 3 live demonstrations of wearable technology that's part of my life. On the left, you see a device that I wear. It's actually clipped to me right now, and it monitors every single breath that I take. It gives me data every day and every week about my periods of focus, of calm, of tension, of activity, of just being sedentary, and often that number is far too high. The one in the middle is a wearable actually for my bed. It's a mattress cover that goes over my bed, and it measures every single time I roll over during the night. It measures my sleep cycles. It measures my temperature, my heart rate, my breathing rate, the ambient temperature in the room, every factor it can collect to tell me exactly how rested I am. And it gives me a score every day to tell me how ready I am to take on the next day. This was not a very good day. And on the right side, you see a wearable that I use to tell me how my body is being activated when I'm exercising. So you might be wondering, what do these really have to do with the future of learning, right? Telling me when I breathe and when I sleep and how my body's activated. Well, I'm going to start with the one on the right here. We're very familiar with the idea of physical coaches, right? Athletic coaches, helping us become better humans, healthier humans, more active humans. But we can also expand this concept into cognitive coaching. So this is another wearable that I use. It's called Emotiv. And it's an EEG headset that has 8 different electrodes that attach to different parts of your brain. And it measures the activation of your mind in real time while you're doing different tasks. And as you can see up here, the report that it gives you tells us about your levels of stress, excitement, engagement, focus, interest, relaxation. And what really is magical about this data is what happens when it can all be brought together. On their own, frankly, none of this really matters. But the more data we can collect about ourselves and the more information we can gain, we can begin to understand patterns and we can begin to understand interrelationships to truly understand how we best learn. So, it's no secret that there are connections between our emotional state, our sleep, and our activity level and how we learn. Just one little factoid, right? There's research just published earlier this year that tells us an estimated 60% of students suffer in school just because of chronobiological variation, which means that the schedules of their school system only work for 40% of the kids in the system. The other 60%, their grades, their GPA, their performance is actually suffering simply because they are not allowed to learn and interact with information in a way that matches with their own circadian rhythm and their own biological clock. And as we keep collecting more of this data, as we keep understanding the interconnection behind it, we can also leverage new technology to tell us in real time what's happening in our bodies, even without devices touching us. So this is a demonstration of an implementation of a big data project in a school in China. It's Hangzhou School number 11. With more data, more biomarkers, more correlations, what they're able to do is actually, in real time, create the ability to monitor the learning process of an entire classroom. And what you see here is their data system actually telling a teacher, in real time, if their students are surprised, happy, angry, sad, neutral, afraid, if their students are apathetic. The system can actually give the teacher a report that predicts how much sleep the students have gotten and if they're getting sick, often before the student even knows it. Another thing I'm particularly excited about, this is sort of the one I really geek out over, is something called flow states. A flow state is a psychological and a neurological state of heightened awareness and focus. Probably a lot of us have experienced these before at some point in our lives. They're those moments where we just lose track of time, we're really in the zone. Often we have a balance of challenge and skill, and the world just sort of melts away as we plow through different things. It's really common to artists, to athletes, often to engineers, surgeons, even accountants and strategists, when we're just doing that thing we were meant to do. And when a person is in a flow state, what happens in your brain? So it's actually sort of a chemical cocktail that comes into your brain when you find a flow state. It's endorphins, it's dopamine, it's anandamine, it's serotonin. And all of these different chemicals together, well, they're pleasure-inducing. They are performance-enhancing chemicals that come into our mind. So finding flow states, achieving flow states more and more often is actually itself a neurological process of learning. So take us out of the moment. It's not necessarily the moment we're experiencing it, but as we go through our lives and we experience flow more and more often, over days, over weeks, over months, over years, this is a process of our brain actually expanding, learning new things, perfecting processes. It's a natural process of growth. So there's a lab at the University of Kansas run by this woman, Barbara Kerr. It's called CLIOS, the Center for Learning and Exploration of Optimal States. And what they are looking at is actually how we begin to induce flow states in clinical settings to help students understand what their own career paths and learning journeys should look like based on the things that bring them flow. So they're actually experimenting with putting students into MRIs and experimentally inducing the experience of conducting different tasks and taking on different roles in the community and monitoring their brain. And what they've found, the early results show that sometimes when we hit a flow state, our brain actually lights up in a predictable pattern that we call a brain flower. And that's what they're looking for. And then they're able to build actual recommendations for these students to carry on through their lives based on this data. At the same time, we're also achieving a much more granular understanding of our own genetic makeup, right? The code that makes up our bodies. So this is actually a map of chromosome 1 of me. It's part of my full my full genome, which I had sequenced last year. And we're not able to do this today, but I imagine a future where we're able to take all of this data that we have, and we're also able to look at our genetic data, and we are able to understand where our deficiencies, where our abilities, where our learning tendencies lie with absolute certainty before we ever even set out on our learning journeys, and we can craft them appropriately for ourselves. So I actually treat myself as a guinea pig in all of this. You know, I use these wearables and I have my genetic data and I'm obsessed with flow states, and over the past 2 years I've made adjustments to my own life. I've monitored my own data. I've monitored my moments of focus and calm and concentration, and I've looked at my sleep patterns, and I've experimented with all sorts of new types of tasks to see where I could possibly find flow. And just to share 2 little pieces of information that came from that experience for me just over 2 years. I learned that I had been structuring my days in a way that was completely antithetical to the curves that my body went through, the circadian rhythms and those brain cycles, and I was doing tasks at the wrong time of the day. So I reorganized my day. I started scheduling meetings in different times. I gave myself a block in the morning just to do some reading. And in the course of 3 months of these experiments, I was able to increase the number of nonfiction books that I was able to read and process 8 times over the year prior, simply by changing the schedule in my day. And I discovered entirely new tasks, entirely new things that brought me that type of flow state that are now a part of my everyday life, so that I can actually find myself in that zone more often. But there's this fact that we're dealing with right now, right? And it's this idea that the 21st century will be equivalent to the last 20,000 years of human progress. That is like going from cavemen to cappuccinos in the course of 100 years. The future does not look like what we've gone through before. So this process of framing and focusing and foraging, it's not a one-shot deal. We don't just climb the hill and get to the summit. What this actually looks like for us, something more like this. It's a little bit crazy. As we go through this future, we will always be learning. We will always be optimizing. We will always be reinventing ourselves and needing to connect with our own power to create. And not just to create things or ideas, but to actually create ourselves over and over and over again. And that is the core of this concept of inventive resilience, that elusive thing we need to develop as we learn through this future. So I imagine this world where people don't answer to a clock, but instead they actually plan their days and their tasks based on their own body's rhythms and their own biological data. And they decide when to work and when to learn based on levels of cognitive function and levels of recovery. I imagine this world where everybody has their own personalized, artificially intelligent, cognitive, and chronobiological coach that can guide us to the right resources at the right moment to learn what we need, when we need it, and how we need it. I imagine this future where, because the standards of production are unified around the world and our processes are so accessible, each one of us can actually begin to plot our course to the future based on our purpose, based on what we truly want to enable. But really and truly, this is that future. It is that blank page. And they say that the only way to predict the future is to create it, but the thing is, a blank page is one of the most terrifying things in the world to most people. Because we have learned throughout our lives that our world is one of restrictions, of structures, of rules, of guidance, of expectations. We've learned that tomorrow will be a lot like today. We've learned that there are right answers and wrong answers. There are right paths and wrong paths. There are paths that will make people happy, and there are paths that will make people disappointed. So seeing that blank page and just being told to begin scares us. So I want to go back to telling you about James, and I'd like to tell you the end of his story. 2 years after James completed this experience with City X and created this model, James was selected from all of the students in the world who had taken part in this curriculum to become the world's youngest space engineer. And partners at a company called Made in Space wanted to help bring to life the story of City X, because it's not science fiction, it's actually kind of science fact. We're at a point in our world where we actually are looking at the possibilities of leaving our planet and how we would provide for ourselves as we leave. So they selected this model that James created of an invention to solve problems on another planet, and they printed it on the International Space Station with NASA astronauts. So on Christmas, 2 years ago, James had this photo sent to him of something he had created one day in a classroom where he had been brave enough to break out of the narrative arc that he had been stuck in for a while. And he saw an idea he had literally take flight, floating in space in front of the Earth. One of the main reasons we did this, one of the most exciting pieces of this kind of learning experience, was to demonstrate to James and to demonstrate to other students and frankly to anybody that anything is possible in this future that we're moving toward. When we're faced with a blank page, that's both the most terrifying element of it and also the most exciting. So again, as I said, I'm a storyteller. And when you stare at a blank page and you're about to tell a story, it's kind of a moment of magic. Because it's that one single moment when anything is possible. And that is the moment you're standing in right now. Thank you.